Cranio family vlog, where every day in the month of September we are tackling another question involving craniosynostosis. Today we're talking about distractors and who uses them. So when it comes to distractors, our history with distractors is through a lot of experience. Our daughter Zoe went through the insertion of her distractors a couple months before our son David was born, with the hopes that maybe we'd be able to get them out prior to his birth. Most people wind up having distractors in for about 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer. In our case, it was more like 4 months. And what a distractor is a piece of titanium spring that has spacers on it, that the spacers are inserted into a gap, and there's this rod that sticks out that has a little spring side to it, so that way it moves around. It looks like a little bit of an antenna coming off of one or either side of the child's head. And the parents get the lovely joy of taking something like this. In fact, this is the one that we had to use for Zoe. And this screwdriver attaches to one of the ends of the antennae, and you have to turn it a certain number of times per set, and a certain number of set per day. For us, we had to turn it at least 3 times per day, and that was at least 1 in the morning, and the remaining was in the evening for Zoe. And it's a complete turn, and for Zoe's, 1 turn was 0.3 millimeters, and there's this really loud clicking sound that happens every time that you turn it. It's a little ratchet, because what that's doing is it's locking the jaws as they slowly open and make space inside the skull. And it's really hard to go through as a parent. It was some of our darkest days dealing with Cranio, just because we physically had to hold our daughter down. We physically had to put a screwdriver to her head and turn it a certain number of times per day.
Right, and there have been quite a few different experiences and different perspectives when it comes to actually putting that screwdriver, attaching it to your child's head. Some kids have actually felt pain, and they start crying and they say it hurts, or infants that you can tell that it's hurting. Others, it's more of the noise. They come to recognize that sound, meaning they're going to be going through something that they don't want to be. And some are much more resilient and aren't really sure what's going on, and it doesn't matter as much. So there is a really wide range of perspective as far as the response from kids with these distractors. The ideal is that they don't feel any pain with it, but there are still some parents that I've talked to, and they're pretty convinced that their kids have felt it when it does separate. So yeah, it's a little bit scary to go through, especially on a daily basis, knowing that that's coming up over a series of weeks and months. I remember it very very strongly, and I don't think of it very fondly at all. I appreciate the effect that it had on my daughter's skull. It was great as far as allowing space for her brain growth, but as an experience, it wasn't very good for any of us. We did not. It wasn't an easy thing to go through.
And the strange thing is there were days to where, for Zoe, she had no reaction to it. Mm-hmm. She would just lay there, put her head in our laps, and we would turn the screw the number of times, and there was either some resistance or not a lot of resistance, and she'd go about her day. And then there were days that it was a nightmare, and those were the days that I recall every single click we had to fight as we turned it. And you have to think about what's happening. Again, the ends of that distractor are in a crevice that's cut into the skull, and as you turn it, it opens very slowly and locks in place, just creating more space. So there are days that the brain helps push some more, or just a growth spurt, or there's not a lot of intracranial pressure, and there's days that you are fighting bone against metal, and it's gut-wrenching. I was very happy to not have to turn the screws to my daughter anymore.
And the benefit of using, there are a few benefits to using the distractors in addition to a CVR as opposed to just a CVR. One of them is that you are able to prolong the amount of space gained in a long term for the child, if that makes sense, because the procedure is not just a one day over several hours event, but it's over months, possibly 6 weeks, maybe even 3 months, depending on the individual case. And this means you are gradually increasing the space within that skull, and it allows for a longer term benefit, where the skull is much more likely to maintain that shape that it's being given.
So another benefit of using distractors is it's not as invasive. When you think about what we've discussed with the CVR, if you go to our blog and read what we've written and some of our other blog posts as well, they're actually physically taking the skull off of the brain, and they're making the hundreds of thousands of microcuts. For the distractors, though there is hardware being placed onto and somewhat inside the skull, they are just making a very small cut along the outside of the skull and placing the distractor into the crevice that's created. This means that whereas the other surgeries where there's a brain that's being exposed and a neurosurgeon who has to sit there and hawk the sac that the brain is in and making sure that the cerebral spinal fluid isn't leaking, that there's no tears, that there's no damage, and is making sure all the bone is clean and that the blood supply is great. For this one, though the neurosurgeon is there just in the event that something happens, it's a surgery that doesn't have such a high risk of many of the other issues, which is most commonly seen. It's usually a tear in the dura, and that has a whole laundry list of complications. With the distractor implementation and removal, it usually is not a concern because they are not actually physically reaching the dura with the surgery.
And along with that would be a third benefit, which is that the procedure itself is because it's much less invasive, it also requires much less time. And the removal of the distractors it's actually considered an outpatient procedure where you don't even really have to stay in the hospital. There isn't really much of a recovery time within the hospital. As soon as they finish removing them, as long as the incision and everything looks fine, then we were cleared to go home. With Zoe, we left within a matter of hours the day that we came in to remove the distractors. So all in all, everything is just a much more low-key setting, especially if you have already gone through the whole process of a CVR and all of the stress and kind of trauma that brings. Having a distractor placement in addition to that, I won't say that it's stress-free because it is still a procedure that is affecting your child's skull. But in perspective, in relation to the CVR, it is much less invasive and much less time-consuming for the procedure itself and also for recovery.
And just like that, in a little bit under 10 minutes, we have taught you a little bit more about something involving craniosynostosis. Today we talked about what exactly distractors are and what the benefits of using them are. And we gave a little bit of anecdotal experience from our side. If you'd like to learn more about us and the last 5 years of parenting, feel free to check out craniofamilyblog.com, and feel free to like and subscribe to our channel so that way you can keep up with the updates that we're going to be trying to publish a lot more often.
Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time.
See you on the other side.